After taking quite a break from working on vintage audio, I think I'm ready to jump back into it, at least for a bit. This is another project from one of my coworkers. It's a Yamaha CR-820 receiver, 1978 or 1979 vintage, thereabouts. And probably one of the cleanest, nicest looking receivers I've gotten in here in a long time. I don't think there's any scratches on this, at least anywhere that's visible at the moment. There's a couple of really minor dents in the corners of the wood in a couple of spots, but that's pretty much it. This thing looks almost new, which is pretty amazing for its age. Other than the plastic cover here is a bit yellowed, but other than that, this thing is beautiful. And from what I was told, it has a problem with the sound cutting out, and one channel's quieter than the other, or something like that. I'll have to look at the note they left me again. But this is going to be just a basic repair. I'm not going to go too crazy with the restoration. I'm just going to make sure it works, make sure it's stable and reliable, and send it on its way. So let me put some covering on this bench to protect this wood, and I'll get this lid removed. This is definitely in good condition. I do see really light scratches right here, but I think that'll actually polish out. I'm pretty surprised to see this is made in Taiwan. I was all but certain this would have been a Japanese receiver, but nonetheless it's still going to be built really well compared to a lot of the crap they make today. Everything's intact. Overall just looks really good, but enough talking and more disassembling here. Well, it looks like somebody's already had this apart at least once before. Two of the screws are already missing. And this reminds me a lot of the cheaper receivers from this era that had the big square washers and screws going through the bottom of the cabinets. But these are a lot bigger than what I'm used to seeing. And I noticed it's got a couple extra feet here in the middle to support the weight. That's pretty cool. Well, so far I haven't had any problems with one channel cutting out yet. The main thing I'm seeing wrong is that the tuner seems to be very weak. I can hardly get any stations on this thing at all, unless I put it in mono mode. Only one station I can get on this thing that's really close to me. Nothing else comes in enough to even unmute the thing when I have it on auto. So I don't know if there's something wrong with my antenna or something wrong with this tuner. But the other thing I see is that the loudness control is really dirty, and that makes one channel or the other cut out when it's moved at all. These switches here aren't bad. Don't seem to make any noise. The volume control is not bad either. But definitely got some lights out and some other issues, so I've got to hook up some more sources to check the other inputs, and we'll go from there. Following up on this project a couple weeks later, I've got my ESR meter here and have checked a lot of the capacitors, and much to my disappointment, a lot of them are bad, with many of them being completely open, not even registering on the tester at all. Mainly in the tuner. I think 98% of the capacitors in the tuner are completely toasted, and I've tested a few down here in the amplifier section, and they're also not looking too good. So I think it's going to need all those small caps replaced. So far I don't have any reason to believe the main filter caps are bad. I've got some hum problems, but I don't think it's because of the capacitors, and it has started exhibiting those symptoms they were telling me about, with the relay cutting in and out, and it making noise out the speakers and things like that. And based on what I'm seeing here, it's got some problems with bad connections, whether it's in a switch or it's broken solder joints. I'm not really sure yet, but it really doesn't like vibration. I'll see if I can get a demo of that here without causing any further damage to the problem. Right now it's acting normal, but if I bump it, and now it's humming. Oh man. Yeah, I'm not going to leave that running because one, I don't want to cause any further harm to this, and two, I don't want to mess up my speakers again. So definitely got to change a bunch of caps and check solder joints, and maybe I'll change a few of the worst caps in the tuner there to see if the tuner improves. And then I got to call the owner and see how much they want to do as far as the restoration work before I get too involved in this. But I've got a starting point now anyway. Well, I definitely see a couple broken solder joints already. They are right down here. This one on the end here is cracked, and the one next to it doesn't look so good either. I think those are both on a TO220 transistor. I'd have to flip the board back over to see for sure, but I can tell those definitely cracked because I saw the leads move when I was poking around some components. And I can see some solder flux on quite a few of the joints here that doesn't appear to be factory, so I wonder if somebody has come in here in the past and touched up solder joints before. So let me take care of these and check the other joints, see if there's any more obvious breaks, and we'll see if the symptoms improve any. Well, despite having fixed several broken solder joints, I still haven't found the one that's causing the major problem. And I've also noticed something else. When the volume is all the way down on any source, I have a slight hiss on the right hand channel only. Even though the signal, when it does come through, is even, when I press the muting button, that hiss goes away. And I still have even balance. So I'm going to look in that circuit to see if the where that noise is coming from. I have to use the oscilloscope to troubleshoot this, both for the power supply problem and for that noise issue, because I can't figure out where the break is. All I know is I tap on the board or flex it a certain way, and it makes it start to act up. So you have to keep looking. It's got to be somewhere. Well, I'm getting a little bit closer to the problem here. Looking at the plus and minus 45 volt power supply rails that feed the amplifier, whenever I bump the receiver just right, I can see them jump upward in voltage with respect to the chassis ground. So this is the negative rail here, and yeah, you can see it's making the relay click on and off every time that jumps up. And I'll switch over to the positive here and then check this one out. That's jumping up quite a bit too, and all I'm doing is just tapping on it just right. I'm starting to wonder if there's a break between the transformer center tap and the chassis, you know, or the common point between the power supply rails, because that's the only thing I can find that's jumping up and down, and it doesn't really make sense other than a broken ground connection somewhere. So I'm gonna have to keep looking. Yeah, it looks like there is a bad connection to the center tap, because I've got my scope ground on the chassis and the scope positive right on the center tap of the transformer, and that's interesting. So the center tap of the transformer is actually rising with respect to the chassis. So I've got to look at this connection. It may be the solder joint right there that comes off the transformer, or it may be the point where it connects to the chassis. But nonetheless, I think that's where the problem lies. Alright, I'm starting to get a bit nervous that the problem might be in the connection in the transformer, and I really hope not, because even touching that wire makes it act a little goofy sometimes. See it moving just a little bit there, but let me take that metal cross brace off the bottom and see if I find anything before I jump to conclusions here. Speaking of that cross brace, I think I might be onto something here. Right down there, next to that filter cap, there is a screw that goes into that cross brace, and it appears to carry the large ground trace and then connect it to the frame at that point. And it seems like ever since I tightened that screw slightly, the problem has gotten a lot better, or even possibly gone away, because now I can't get it to mess up. This metal cross brace on the bottom of the frame does indeed play a critical role in connecting the ground bus together, because right now I've got my meter connected to the frame here, and you can see I've got continuity. And on the boards here there are points that have no connection to ground except for where that cross brace attaches, and you can see there's no continuity here, no continuity here, none over here, and the most critical point of all, which is the center tap on the transformer, nothing. It has no connection to the chassis without that cross brace. So that will definitely make everything drift all over the place without its critical reference point to the transformer center tap. So that's kind of a silly design in my opinion. Any sort of corrosion gets in here, or if those screws come loose, that's what happens. Things just don't work right. So I'm going to take care of that, clean these up, and fix all the solder joints that are just completely broken, and then we'll see about tackling the capacitors and that hiss problem on the right channel, which I believe is a leaky transistor down in here, but we'll find out in a bit. Well, I've been working on replacing all the bad capacitors in the power supply and amplifier section, and there's a couple that are buried way down inside, down in here, and I'm actually going to have to take this transformer out to get to those, and take the shields off the output transistors, so that's going to take a bit of work. Most of these larger ones are still okay. It's mainly the small ones, like the 5mm diameter ones are all bad, and some of the 6.3mm diameter. And I haven't even started on the tuner yet. That's going to be the last thing I do, because that's the owner told me they don't really use the tuner, but I'm going to try to get it working regardless, because it's going to bug me if it doesn't after everything else I've done to this. But I'll follow up in a bit here. I got to change a few more caps. Well, that was certainly fun getting that capacitor in there. Had to move the transformer out of the way and work around this frame edge here. But now we're just going to solder that in and trim the leads, and the worst is over for the hard to reach capacitors, I hope. Not a bad left-handed solder job. Those are always fun when you're extremely right-handed like I am. Today I've been working on recapping the tuner and the phono preamp circuit, and you can see I've also added some ground wires to act as a fail-safe in the event that those screws come loose again. They've had a kind of rudimentary star grounding system on this receiver where everything kind of ties back to this center tap over here, you know, originating at the filter caps. It goes through this metal brace, goes onto the tuner, goes to this ground plane, and then it also continued along the metal brace that goes across the back of the receiver and connects over here to the shield of the tuning condenser and the ground plane on this side of the tuner. So that has no connection without this cross brace installed. And there's a couple other ones over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add these little jumper wires, chain everything together, and then bring them all back to this common point back here. And that way, if any of the screws come loose on these braces in the future, it won't be nearly as much of a problem as it was before. Well, much to my surprise, the tuner did not improve much, even after replacing all those bad capacitors. So I wonder if there's an IC on there that's starting to fail or something, or either that or somebody messed with the adjustments. It's hard to tell, but the tuner is the lowest priority, so I'm going to move on to the next problem, which is the hiss in the right channel. And I'm all but certain that it's coming from the tone control board, so I'll take a quick look at the schematic and show what I've found so far. This is the diagram for the tone control board, which has several transistors on it. And I'm in the process of troubleshooting the hiss in the right channel. And I found that if I ground this point here, the output for the right channel, the hiss goes away. If I ground over here, where the input side is, it doesn't affect the hiss. So it's pretty much a dead giveaway that one of these transistors on the tone control board is what's causing the noise. Well, it appears that there's no easy way to gain access to that tone control board for servicing. Can't get to it from underneath, and there's too much stuff on top here for me to service it while it's in place. So unfortunately it looks like I've got to remove the entire faceplate, which means I've also got to remove all the knobs. Yeah, that's going to take a bit of work. I'm in the process of getting ready to remove the faceplate. I wanted to mention a couple things on these knobs. These four over here just pull straight off. And for these two input selectors, there is a 2mm Allen wrench set screw in the bottom of them. Volume and balance just pull straight off. It's a two-piece knob. The tuning knob, however, is a two-step process. Because of the way that this is constructed, it has this big weight on here, and I don't want that to fall down and, you know, come unraveled from the string, you know, have the string come off it. So you loosen those two Phillips head screws that are on the back of the assembly there. See if I can get a good view of those. But yeah, there's two Phillips head screws there that you loosen. And then that allows you to pull the tuning knob out a little bit and gain access to the two set screws that are on that. That way it leaves the axle in the bearing assembly to hold that weight in place. Here's what the receiver looks like without the faceplate. It's got a nice aluminum dial face, actually. And once the knobs are pulled off, there's just 4 screws on top and 4 screws on bottom. And they go through the aluminum itself on the faceplate. There's a few things you don't need to take off. But it also brings the fronts of the push buttons with it. They have a spring-loaded assembly here that just stays attached to the faceplate. But now that this is off here, I'm going to put it somewhere safe so it doesn't get scratched, and try to get this tone control board out of here. I think I just need to unscrew these 4 controls, and I should be able to lift it right out if they left me enough slack on the wires. I've just about got this board out, but this potentiometer on the left is hitting the bracket for the power switch, so still having a hard time getting this to come the rest of the way out. It's a lot easier to get to without that meter assembly in the way, though. Well, I've got a little bit better access to this board now. Looks like there's 8 transistors on here, and I think at least 2 of them are going to have to be checked. But what I'm going to do, since I don't think I have any replacements on hand, I think I'm going to swap the transistors between the 2 channels until I find which one is noisy, and then I can try to source a replacement at that point. Well, this is interesting. I checked all the transistors and they were fine, but then I decided to disconnect the output from the tone control board, and I'm starting to think that the noise is actually backfeeding from farther up, because with the output disconnected, look how loud the noise is now when I turn this thing on. That is seriously just noise coming out of the right channel amplifier. So if I move the balance all the way to the left, there's barely any noise. So, yep, gotta keep chasing it. Well, I think I finally found it. It was CR-820 down on the main board. It's right on the edge of the board there. It's in the high filter circuit. So I moved it, I swapped them between the two channels, and the problem followed. Now it's coming out of the left. So I think I just got to replace those two transistors, and we should have a big improvement in the noise floor. Well, my transistor tester actually lied to me again. This 2SC1213 that was in the high filter, the problem follows that transistor, and my tester still said that there was no leakage current on that transistor. So that really blows my mind. Either my tester is bad, or it's a very, very, very sensitive circuit, and the amount of leakage that the transistor has, you know, maybe it doesn't register on the tester, but it does in circuit at higher voltage. So who knows? Now I've got to find a substitute for 2SC1213. Looks like a good substitute is the KSC2383Y. In fact, the silkscreen picture on the circuit board actually matches the replacement transistor, even though the pinout is reversed from the original. The original ones that were in there, you know, you'd think they were in backwards if you went by the picture, but they're not. So I'm going to look around and see if there's any more of these noisy pieces of crap in here that need to be changed and get them swapped out. But that was an interesting one to chase. Oh, it's doing much better now. There's almost no noise coming out of it. Yeah, huge improvement. I wanted to make some clarifications on that noise problem that was going on. Back when I was recording the segments for that repair, I actually had a pretty bad cold, which I'm still getting over, so I might have been a bit hard to understand. But the problem ended up being TR-610. Right here in the high filter circuit, transistor was leaky, and I thought the problem was back here in the tone control board, because I was grounding this point at the output of the tone control board, and the noise would completely vanish when I did that. So, you know, I figured that everything from here forward was okay. Well, it turns out that that transistor was actually backfeeding all that noise, because I had tested all the transistors over here and found that they were okay. And I decided then at that point to disconnect this wire between the tone control board and the input to the high filter, and then the noise got extremely loud because there was nowhere for it to bleed off to anymore. I had both channels disconnected in that same way, and only the right channel had that extremely loud hissing. So I took out both of these transistors. There's just one per channel, and when I swapped them, the problem followed that transistor. And I knew at that point that it was definitely at fault. And also, the reason the balance control was able to affect how loud that noise was depending on where I rotated it is because the balance control is up here between the high filter circuit and the power amp. So everything that was going on back here was able to be attenuated by that balance control. So that was some pretty interesting symptoms in that. I've seen several leaky transistors over the years, but that was the first time I've seen one that made almost a perfect pink noise and also backfed in that fashion. So I'll have to watch out for that more often when I come across a symptom like that. I probably wouldn't have caught that problem if I had not decided to disconnect that point and let this run with an open input. You know, I probably would have been chasing that noise for a lot longer, but I figured, what the heck, you know, I'll disconnect this, and I was thinking about maybe feeding another signal into that or seeing if the noise went away with that disconnected. And when it got loud at that point, I knew something wasn't right. Well, I think I'm about done with the tone control board now. I found that more than half of the capacitors were out of tolerance on there, so I ended up just replacing all of them, because it would bug me if I left a bunch of the old ones on there at this point. And I also ended up desoldering the loudness potentiometer so I could get deoxide into it to clean it, and the other ones were open on the back, so I didn't have to unsolder those. But hopefully this board's all set and I can mount that back in and move on to the next part. I think the next thing I'm going to take a look at is the dial lights. Let's see if I can take care of that, and of course do another sound check at this point as well. For replacing the dial lights in the receiver, I picked up a couple different kinds of LEDs to test. The standard 5mm LEDs on the right that have the clear lenses were actually a bit too large to fit in the space of the original lamps. Right on the left you can see some little green LEDs. Those are Cree Screenmaster LEDs that are actually designed for video signs, and they're kind of an oval shape with a 4mm width. Those ended up being a perfect fit, and the color worked out really good too. These actually have a bit richer, deeper green color than what the camera shows, but the lighting above my bench is making it difficult to get an accurate shot too. I think I'll wait till I have the faceplate reinstalled so that it looks a bit more presentable. But they do a pretty good job of lighting up the meter faces, despite the limitations of the reflectors, making it a little bit uneven looking. I've finally started reassembling this receiver. I've got all the cross braces reinstalled, got all the knobs back on. Most of the cosmetic work is done. I've still got some minor things left to do. But at this point, I'm ready to do a sound check and a stability check. Let this run for a while and monitor the idle current on the amplifier and things like that, make sure nothing drifts out of spec. I'm also going to test the phono input by using one of these passive equalizer attenuator boxes so I can run a standard line level signal into the phono preamp, since the phono circuit is what the owner mainly uses on this receiver. So let me flip this thing back upright and find some music that I can use on YouTube. So far, pretty darn good. Right now I'm checking the idle current, and according to the service manual there should be 8 millivolts across the test points. Right now it's sitting about 5 millivolts, and it's all but certainly because this room is so cold and this heat sink is barely above room temperature. And as the temperature goes up, so does the idle current. So I think I'm going to have to put the cover on this, at least temporarily, and play it at a normal volume for a while and just make sure that it does not exceed the rated idle current once it's at operating temperature. I also have to make sure that both channels are tracking evenly with each other to some degree. So with the idle current being too low, once it's up to temperature, if it's still not at 8 millivolts, that can increase the distortion, but if it goes too high, it's going to overheat the output transistors and potentially go into thermal runaway to the point that they eventually short out, and that's not going to be good. So I'm going to keep an eye on this and make sure that it stays within spec, and I think we're getting close to finishing this one up. Well, I'm really glad I gave this a second look before I put it all back together. I was doing the output power check and found that I was only getting about 36 watts out of it before it started cutting off the top of the waveform really bad. And this receiver is spec'd for 50 watts. So I checked the voltages again and found out that the plus 12 volt test point was reading low. I traced the problem back to D806 here in the power supply. It's the same part number as D807, and they looked completely different physically. So I don't know if somebody had changed the diode at some point in the past or if it was wrong right from the factory, but you're supposed to be getting 13.7 volts at the cathode of D806, and I was only getting about 9.5. D807 had 14 volts like they specify, so I ended up putting in a brand new 14 volt Zener diode in there, and all the voltages are back to normal, and I have nice even symmetrical clipping and a solid 60 watts per channel now, so definitely a big improvement there. I'm going to do another sound check now that I know everything's getting the right voltages. Well, there doesn't seem to be a huge difference in the sound quality because I wasn't really pushing it to the point of clipping before. But nonetheless, I think I've got it all tweaked up. And the tuner definitely works a lot better with some slight tweaks and a better antenna. I've got several stations on it now. I can't demo that because of YouTube though. Some of you might remember this track from when I was testing that mixer that I got at the yard sale. I don't know why, I just love the synthesizer on this. The speakers for good measure. But anyway, I think I'm going to put this thing back together and call it good because this has been taking way too long to get done. Well, it's about time to wrap this project up, I think. I've already spent way too much time on it. And I've had to go back through and readjust the idle current a couple times and try to accommodate for the heat buildup with the cover being installed. And I got it as close as I can get it. And I think it turned out pretty good overall. And here's all the parts that were changed. Had 2 transistors, 1 diode, several capacitors, and 4 lamps. Had this been a full restoration, that plastic bin would probably be filled halfway up with components. But I really had to try to stick to a budget on this, and I already went over it as it is, so overall, not too bad in the end though. So I guess I'll see you guys on the next video. Whether it'll be computers or audio, it's hard to say, but I hope to have more stuff uploaded pretty soon. Things are getting kind of crazy around here lately.